Chapter 43, Theory Crafting. So to what do I owe the visit? Dumbledore asked. Harry and Remus had scheduled an appointment in his office for Sunday morning. Various contraptions moved and puffed silvery smoke. Books were lying around where they weren't stuffed onto shelves. The portraits of the previous headmasters stared in interest from the walls, and a much younger-looking phoenix slept on his perch. This, Remus said, setting a small, rune-etched box on the headmaster's desk. Your inclination will be to touch. You should not. It's badly cursed. The delay to Sunday had been enough time for Remus and Sirius to get up to speed and investigate the room of requirement and the object that Harry had found, and for Remus to get over the worst of his full moon hangover. Oh my, the old man declared, carefully opening the box, his hand flinching back as he resisted his urge to reach in and grab it. Harry checked the combat log. Ravenclaw's diadem uses suggestion on Albus Dumbledore. Failure, the same thing had happened to Remus. At least whatever magic it was using wasn't enough to succeed against the well-trained older wizards, even though they didn't have maxed-out willpower. This is Ravenclaw's lost diadem. The headmaster finally got out. Sadly recovered by Tom Riddle, Remus agreed. Harry and his friends found it in the room of requirement and fortunately recognized the same feeling of suggestion that the diary used. Dumbledore sighed. I apologize, my boy. I had no idea such a thing could be hiding in there, else I would have warned you of the possibility. I cannot imagine that Tom had it as a schoolboy, so he must have used the opportunity of his visit to apply for the defense position to hide it. I should have been more wary of his route through the school. How did you even find it? There's a room of requirement setting that the elves used to store junk, Harry summarized. Able to, ask for that room, but organized. The diadem kind of stood out from the costume jewelry around it. And well it should, he agreed, beard fallen in a frown at the perversion of such an artifact. He began to swish his wand above the case, muttering several detection spells that Harry was starting to get the rudiments of for his spellbook. Dumbledore's look only got darker and darker as he received the results, until he finally clapped the lid back on the box. Such a waste. To ruin such an item. Do you think this one will require basilisk venom to destroy as well? Remus asked the leading question. They'd already tried several strong attack spells just to be sure, and none had scratched it. You have a theory. The old man turned it back on him. Remus sighed at the obvious manipulation, but explained, there's a term that only gets mentioned at the edge of a defense mastery, around the various dark wizards that seemed immortal. Horcrux. Perhaps Harry should return to his dorm, Dumbledore suggested, actually surprised that Remus had jumped to that conclusion. Harry, annoyed, asked, did you remove all the books that mentioned that from the school library with the occlumency ones? The headmaster closed his eyes briefly, marshalling his strength in the face of the apt accusation, before admitting, yes, because I worried that Tom had found them while he was a student here. What is it? Harry asked, clearly not ready to get sent away. Remus explained, placing part of your soul in an artifact, so your spirit will not depart the world when you die. If your body is intact, you can simply be revived into it. And if it's destroyed, even worse dark rituals might still be able to bring you back. In addition to the act of committing a murder as part of the ritual, it's a terrible thing to do to yourself, Dumbledore added. You potentially extend your life at the cost of your afterlife, to never be able to pass on. That's a piece of Voldemort's soul. Harry pointed at the box containing the diadem. Wait, was the diary one too? That's why we couldn't see where it keeps its brain. Remus had seemingly been thinking along those lines, as he pointed out, horrified but not surprised. No recorded Dark Lord is known to have made more than one. Tom always was an overachiever, the headmaster sighed. And if he made two, he might have made more. I'm aware that he worked as an artifact procurer after leaving Hogwarts, and might have come across other items of power that he deemed worthy. And that's why he didn't die when he attacked me when I was a baby, Harry followed. He can't die until we destroy all of these Horcruxes. Horcrux. Harry's conversational Latin rating was high enough he wasn't sure. Horcruxes, Dumbledore replied, looking at Harry astutely. Though I'm curious how you came upon enough Latin to note the possibility of an I ending for the plural. Spending a lot of time in the library, he shrugged. Clearly feeling like a firmer hand was needed, the headmaster asserted, no, I have been content to stand back and try to puzzle out your actions of this year from the sidelines. as I have clearly somehow lost your trust. But with you finding two artifacts of such evil, I fear I must insist on being told what is going on. Your Snape would have read it from my mind if you could have. Harry fired back, not liking being pushed. I apologize. I am very sorry. It's one bad habit of probably many, and I have grown complacent in using it to sort through the casual deceptions of teenagers. I should not have used legilimency on you without your consent. Harry huffed. The old man did sound contrite, and he desperately wanted the help of the Archmage with all of his problems. But he fired back. It's even worse that you let Snape do it. I'm sure he uses it to bully us in class, and all because he's still mad at my dad and his friends. Dumbledore was not intending to give up any secrets, but he had a deep sense that Harry might return something of profound value if he could regain his trust. Something had clearly happened to the boy over the summer that was setting him on the path to victory that the old man had always hoped for. So he simply asked, Remus, my trust is with Severus, fully. Why do you think I might trust that he is an enemy of Lord Voldemort? Remus considered for a moment. He worked through his own memories, and then, brightening, he ventured, he didn't want Lily to be hurt. What? Harry asked. Remus explained. Severus was best friends with your mother until late in our school career. They fell out over his friendships toward the end of our time here, but I could easily believe he still wanted the best for her. If he was friends with my mom, why is he so mean to me? Harry almost whined. Consider who is watching in your classes, Dumbledore suggested. Just the rest of my friends and the Slythery, Harry trailed off, realizing. He shared a look with Remus. He turned back to the headmaster. He thought about it some more. He asked, is Snape only mean to me so the Slytherins will think he hates me? He smiled as if Harry was a dog that had done a particularly clever trick, and agreed. There may come a time that it is important that our enemies think that your ally is theirs. Try not to let anyone know that you understand the act. Remus spoiled the assertion by adding, while I can believe that Severus' loyalty is ultimately to you, and perhaps Lily, I can also believe that tormenting someone that looks like James Potter is something he inherently enjoys. I've heard the stories, Albus. No future benefit to spying on the Death Eaters can justify the abuse he inflicts on his classes. Puckering like he'd just eaten a candy that was more sour than expected, the old man allowed, I'll look into it. It's possible he's taken the charade too far. Seeing that both Remus and Harry looked mollified, he pushed again with, if that's acceptable, please elucidate me on how you came upon all of this information. Remus Lupin replies, it's your call, Harry. Harry glanced at the werewolf side and decided that the astute Archmage would eventually get the whole story from him if he got any of it, and just decided to shotgun blast information. He started by asking Dumbledore, what do you know about Echrisdes? Surprised by the seeming non-sequitur, the headmaster answered, the dark wizard that is believed to be responsible for Azkaban. Nodding, Harry explained, we think I somehow got a power he had. I got it on my birthday last summer. I can do a lot of things that seem like they're straight out of Muggle video games. But maybe video games just got the ideas of them from people that have this power. Oh, and we think that him trying to give the power to his students created Dementors. For such a short revelation, it was a lot to process. Dumbledore thought about it for a few seconds and noted, I'm not familiar with what a video game is. Harry sighed. It would take more time to explain video games than to explain his powers. Like the world is just a game. I can see people's names and stuff about them floating over their heads. I can see a map of where I am. I can talk to people that aren't in the room with me. I can store my stuff somewhere that doesn't seem to exist. He pulled his broom out of his inventory, then put it back in. The inventory trick always convinced people. Oh, and some books are skill books, and I can just read them in a few seconds and learn months of schoolwork. The power he knows not, Dumbledore couldn't help but murmur, he latched onto, and presumably this power allowed you to organize the room of requirement. Yeah, I can see its settings, and all the rooms that have been saved. The room of hidden things kind of stood out. It was a real dump before I asked it to sort. Harry realized something else he'd been leaving out. Oh, and I get quests that give me hints about things that are about to happen. That's how I worked out the Chamber of Secrets problem so early. You're divining the future. Pretty much. I kind of wonder if they're supposed to be what would happen if I didn't see the quest. Like, it acted like I skipped a bunch of steps when I killed the basilisk before anything bad really had a chance to happen. Maybe it thought I wasn't going to find out about it until it had a chance to start hurting people. Such a creature loose in the school and controlled by an unwitting pawn of Tom's certainly could have caused significant mischief, the old man understated. He'd been thinking about how lucky they'd got. Yeah, and I kind of get the feeling that I was supposed to only have one main quest a year or something. I only had one last year. Maybe the Chamber of Secrets was supposed to take most of this year, but then another one started when Sirius escaped. And that might not have happened if I hadn't been able to talk to him through the game system. Of course, you mentioned speaking with people that weren't in the same room. Dumbledore caught up. You talked to Sirius Black using these abilities and caused him to escape. Right. I've mentioned he's totally innocent, right? Peter Pettigrew was hiding as Ron's rat, Scabbers, and overheard when I told Ron about what I'd figured out by the time I went to the burrow last summer. So he escaped, and we haven't been able to catch him to prove he's still alive. Harry realized he was rambling and trailed off. At this point, the headmaster was just taking so many revelations in stride, filing them away to reconstruct his assumptions later. You say we, but you've been at school since, save for the holidays. I was looking for him, Remus stepped in. With Sirius. And Peter was hiding as a pet rat, you said, which suggests he was an unregistered animagus. That is a skill I doubt he could have attained without the help of others. The elderly archmage simply raised an eyebrow. Yes, Sirius is Padfoot, Remus sighed. He wanted to come to the school so he could be around to protect Harry. We can't prove his innocence, and it's the only way he can move around freely. Anyway, Harry interjected, finally getting to what he hoped to achieve by reading the headmaster in. The quest that started when Sirius escaped from Azkaban eventually got us researching Dementors and Echrisdes. And that's how we found out he must have had pretty much the same power as me. And the next thing it wants me to do is investigate Azkaban for something he left behind. And we don't know how to do that, but maybe you could help. Chapter 44, Grinding. Dumbledore promised to look into getting Harry into Azkaban, but suggested that, unless he got some notification that time was of the essence, it might ideally wait until the Easter holidays. Remus agreed, at least as far as he wanted Harry to have mastered the Patronus before going, and thought it might take the 3 months in question. So Harry had nothing to do until early April besides practice. Well, that wasn't entirely true. Finally, read-in, the headmaster was very interested in testing the extent of Harry's abilities. On arbitrary evenings, Harry would be sent an invitation with a password to his office, always some form of candy, to demonstrate or try something that the old man had thought of. While he hadn't learned anything new, Dumbledore, at least, was increasingly excited about the breadth of his abilities, and didn't mention the obvious potential for cheating in class, so that was nice. Harry was also fielding quite a few questions about video games. Unfortunately, his depth of knowledge was only a month of playtime and a few games played. But he mentioned that he still had the game computer in question, and the headmaster's eyes got wide as he asked to borrow it. While his detection spells came up with nothing unusual about the device, he wasn't thwarted. It turned out that the room of requirement was somehow able to respond to, I need a room with electricity where I can plug in and use a Muggle electronic device. After that, they were often unable to get into the room for their own purposes while Dumbledore was inside, using it to play video games as research. It was fine. The lack of immediate crises gave Harry more time to hit the library. By the beginning of March, the number of shelves he hadn't been through was significantly smaller than the number he'd cleared. And that was with Quidditch practice with Wood and spell practice with Remus also taking a lot of time. He'd managed to get up to 16s in his core magical skills and 17s in charms and combat magic from the practice with Remus, as well as 11s in his elective skills. He'd also picked up another smattering of random general skills that happened to be covered in the library. Purely on practical capability, Remus thought that he was at the point that he might do pretty well on his OWL tests, which he wasn't meant to take for another 3 years. And on a Monday night on the 1st of March, he'd get to put that skill to the test again. Dawlish had finally scheduled another school-wide dueling club for after dinner. They'd done a few smaller clubs over the last couple of months, separated by year to give people more chance to duel against their peers. Harry had gotten good enough that he really wasn't getting any challenge from the others. Even Draco had stopped embarrassing himself trying to duel Harry. But the opportunity to go up against the upper years, Harry was hoping for another chunk of XP like he'd gotten before the winter holidays. Dawlish seemed content to oblige. Right. We're going to do exhibitions tonight, he led off, once everyone was assembled in the great hall, once again set up like it had been in the winter. I want you to pay attention to what the winners are doing, and the losers, what works for dodging spells, what works for landing a hit. Was it dumb luck or a real strategy? Flitwick and Snape had come back, and with Remus also attending, it was interesting that each of the houses had an adult representative, since Dawlish had been in Hufflepuff. Snape paired against Flitwick again, and lasted significantly longer than he had previously, obviously having been practicing and considering his strategy since his defeat. There were a few more obvious moments where if he'd gone with something more deadly, he might have won, and Harry thought he could see the potions professor check a desire to bust out some dark magic to grab that victory. Then Dawlish paired with Remus, and the two of them were much more evenly matched. Remus went with some standard bread-and-butter spells, produced quickly and well. Given the last couple of months of teaching Harry to shield and stun, he'd really rounded out his own use of those spells. Dawlish favored the disarming charm and various binding spells, more used to fighting to lock down an opponent. Slowly it became clear that, while Remus had fought in the war as a young man, he'd had less actual experience fighting other wizards than Dawlish. For all that he was one of the more political auras, the man did regularly find himself in spell combat with magical criminals. Remus was slowly being pushed back, and eventually ran out of space to dodge, as Dawlish landed a spell to wrap him in conjured ropes. Questions about the spells that were used. Bring them up to Lupin or Flitwick in your classes, Dawlish instructed, as soon as those exhibitions were finished. Now, what you've probably been waiting for. Who wants to line up to have another go at Potter? Harry took his place on stage right, as the contenders formed up by year. None of the second years wanted to get annihilated again, not even Draco, and hardly any third years got in line. Well, a couple of people from Gryffindor showed up just to show they were willing, and Cormac, because he couldn't admit he wouldn't win, and a few of the other kids he'd beaten at winter break wanted another chance. Behind them, in the fourth years, his friends on the Quidditch team lined up, just out of curiosity, as did the Slytherin Quidditch players, and a few others from the other two houses. Cedric was at the end of the pack, not looking as confident as his housemates thought he should be. He knew how close the match was the last time. The fifth years and up were waiting to see if Harry got through the fourth years before getting in line. And then Harry started grinding. Match after match, all he really had to do was dodge and look for an opening. He might have been tempted to try some of the new spells he'd been learning, but the disarming charm was efficient, and dodging was free for him. In an endurance match, the most important thing was to not slowly empty out his magical stamina. He figured he needed to keep it topped off so he'd have it if a contender actually proved a difficulty. He was honestly starting to worry that it wasn't much fun for the people watching, as he repeated the same routine over and over. His opponents were trying different things. Fred and George, especially, knew what he could do and tried to catch him in obscure prank spells that he'd previously had a hard time dodging. But he'd just gotten too good since their duels over the summer. He even managed to tick over into another point of basic dodging in the middle of one of their matches. And with his owl combat magic getting close to maximum, he was as fast and accurate as a skilled fifth year. Finally, the fourth years were winnowed out, and it came down to Cedric, who was looking even less confident than he'd started. They bowed. They started casting. After a minute, it looked like it might go similarly to the last time, with Cedric's strong shield charm able to block Harry's lowerier spells. But Harry had also been building up other magical skills, like Transfiguration, Avaforce. Incanted, after throwing some pebbles from a pocket onto the ground. It was a second-year Transfiguration, but usually one that took a lot of time. When Harry cast it, each turned into a crow, perfectly formed, and began to flock at Cedric. Well, if Harry was right about the word for a group of them, to attempt a murder. Having to drop his shield to try to burn the birds out of the air with a fire-making charm, Cedric wasn't able to defend against Harry's disarming charm. "Oh, well done." He heard Flitwick note to Remus. "Minerva will be sad she missed this. Don't see many students managing combat transfigurations." Harry cancelled his transfiguration so the remaining birds would leave Cedric alone and return the boy's wand. "Good show, Potter." He shook Harry's hand, seemingly not that put out at the loss. "I'm going to really have to practice for the next time." The fifth years took a minute to coalesce, which suited Harry, since it gave him time to recover the magical stamina he'd spent on Cedric. All of the students, themselves about to take their own owls, seemed to recognize that Harry was somehow fighting on their level. Did they dare risk losing face by being beaten by a 12-year-old? Harry was curious how much XP they were worth. After all the points for the fourth years, his bar was getting really close to full. Bowl and Derek, the beaters from the Slytherin Quidditch team, decided that it was worth the risk to prove they could beat the boy who lived and move to the front of the line. Without their names floating over their heads, Harry wouldn't really be able to tell them apart. But as it happened, Lucian Bowl went first. "Going to take you down, Potter," the older boy insisted, sketching only a short bow. He'd been watching and thought he had a solution to Harry's skilled dodging, area effect spells. "Reducto," he yelled moments after Dawlish told them to go. The object-shattering curse wasn't quite as overkill for a duel as it seemed to all the students gasping at the attack. It was optimized to destroy objects, not flesh, so probably wouldn't kill Harry if it hit him dead on. And Bowl had targeted the stage in front of him, hoping to just create enough shrapnel that dodging would be useless. He wasn't expecting Harry to yell Pratigo and catch the powerful curse on a magical shield that was taught in fourth year. He wasn't expecting that shield to hold against the follow-up stunning spell he'd sent Harry's way, expecting him to be staggered by the initial blast. And he certainly wasn't expecting Harry to immediately throw his own Stupefy. As he dropped the shield, Bowl keeled over, stunned, in a match that had lasted maybe 6 seconds. It turned out that fifth years were worth 125 XP. Harry grinned. He had a sliver of bar left until he leveled up. Derek blanched where he was next up, especially when Dawlish announced, "I didn't think I needed to say that spells that destroy the dueling stage are banned. I better not see any more Reductos. No Bombarders either. If you can manage a Confringo, it's right out." Harry checked that his spellbook had recorded those incantations so he could try to learn the spells later. They sounded useful. Peregrine Derek, without access to explosions, tried to catch Harry with his own trick. Avis, Avis, Aves. He quickly incanted, conjuring several of his namesake falcons. Harry could only assume he'd decided to make that his own signature spell due to his first name. If he'd been a normal second year, Harry's finite. Shouldn't have effortlessly caught all of the birds and counterspelled them back into so much quickly fading magical mist. In the audience, Cedric mentally kicked himself for not thinking to just try that against Harry's crows. Harry used the disarming charm, and Derek shielded. The Slytherin tried a leglocker curse, but Harry dodged. The match actually went on for nearly a minute. It turned out that Derek was a good duelist for his year and wasn't going to be surprised by Harry's new tricks like Bowl had been. He even had a couple of levels on Harry, so probably had more magical stamina. What he didn't have was effortless dodge. The Slytherin boy was clearly becoming winded jumping out of the way and having to shield more often, while Harry was carefully managing his own, probably smaller pool of magical stamina by dodging as much as he wanted. Finally, he saw an opening and disarmed the older boy. He was a little worried that he'd emptied his own magical stamina for the next duel, but the XP from Derek was enough. 125 combat XP awarded level up. Along with the lights and trumpets, Harry felt suddenly fresh as a daisy as his bar refilled right in front of his eyes, and he tacked on another 50 points of magical stamina to boot. Next up, Beatrice Haywood, the Hufflepuff prefect, saw Harry's grin and did not like her chances. Chapter 45, Matchmaking. Harry had ultimately lost to Gemma Farley, the Slytherin prefect who gotten ahead of Marcus Flint and stood at the front of the line of sixth years. She'd managed several Newt-level spells Harry had never seen before, the last of which proved impossible to dodge. But she was at least gracious in her victory in a way that Flint wouldn't have been, so Harry considered it a fair beat. He was just sad that he hadn't figured out how many XP sixth years were worth. Dawlish had finished out the match by pointing out that Harry was clearly breaking the curve, and none of the rest of them had beaten you-know-who as a baby, but they could still pay attention to what he'd been doing and try to emulate it to improve their own casting. But even the aging aura didn't seem to totally believe it. He had never seen anyone able to dodge for as long as Harry did without tiring out. Another mystery about the boy who lived. Harry only briefly agonized about his 2 level 4 perks. While he was very curious about what it meant to get finesse or perception to 20, his scores of 11 and 12 meant he wasn't going to get them with 2 increases of +3. And he'd been eyeing Faye for doing Luna's quests, and the sight for making his ever-increasing divination score more useful than just sometimes giving him more information on an inspect attempt. Taking Faye had the more obvious immediate effect. It did, indeed, highlight anyone he focused on in a colored aura, essentially a few inches of translucent light around them, as if they were standing in front of a pane of glass cut to their silhouette, but too large. There were also interesting flickers in many people's auras, such that he could see how Luna would regard them as some kind of bug or sprite, but he thought they were more like motes or sparks. He was hoping that he'd get a better sense of what the various colors and particle effects meant over time. It took him until the next day to notice what the sight had changed, expecting that he'd actually have to do some divinations to get it to kick in. He hadn't been actively tracking his main quests, but when he happened to check his quest log, he found that each now had a new entry at the end. The Prisoner of Azkaban main quest. A secret from your past has escaped. Get to Hogwarts, learn about the crimes of Sirius Black *, learn about Dementors, learn more about Ecrisdes. Investigate Azkaban. For what Ecrisdes left behind. Defeat the Guardians, the Goblet of Fire main quest. Who will be the greatest mage in Europe? Attend the Quidditch World Cup. Escape the riot. The site is showing me the next quest goal that's going to pop up after I check the active one off. He almost shouted at his friends when he noticed it. Fortunately, Tuesday was a pretty light day for second years, and it was just Harry, Ron, and Hermione at their favorite table in the library without anyone else around to notice. What? Ron asked, not getting it. After I investigate Azkaban, there's now another one after that. It says I'm going to have to defeat the Guardians. Then after I attend the World Cup, it says I need to escape the riot. But what if we took steps to prevent a riot? Hermione wondered. We've changed what happened in a main quest before. But yes, this does seem very useful. You'd have gone into both places not expecting a fight. You should tell the headmaster about these Guardians. That revelation certainly changed Dumbledore's planning. He was only slightly mollified when Harry suggested that main quests probably would never be too difficult for him to complete. He was sure that they were talking about Guardians that might give Harry a bit of a challenge, but with a 20th level Archmage along, it should be easy, right? The headmaster also seemed worried about a potential riot at the World Cup, but that was a problem months away. Consequently, Harry spent less time in the library in March than he spent getting private training with Remus, and sometimes even the headmaster. It wasn't enough that he'd gotten the shield spell and stunner to work. He needed to be great at them. Based on the types of Guardians one might expect in a dark wizard's hidden sanctum, they were also drilling on the fire-making charm and various specific counters to the kind of defenses and creatures that might be able to survive for hundreds of years. It had taken weeks, but he finally also got a fully corporeal patroness. He'd started off trying to use Hagrid telling him he was a wizard as his happy thought, and then the first day he had the game system, but neither were powerful enough. Eventually, he realized that he should be thinking of the great winter holidays he just had, particularly culminating in realizing he got to live with Sirius and not the Dursleys. Somehow all the thoughts had merged, and the imago of his protector was a large canine that seemed to be somewhere in between Sirius Animagus form, Remus, Wolf Patronus, and Hagrid's dog, Fang. Dumbledore had quietly been wielding his influence over the last several weeks to get an inspection of Azkaban that he could bring Harry and Remus on. He'd bundled the whole trip up in mentions of Harry's strong reaction to Dementors, finding out how Sirius had escaped, and suspicions that there might be something akin to the Chamber of Secrets on the island that Harry might be able to access. He'd planned to take one of the auras that was part of his Order of the Phoenix. "If anyone's going, it's going to be me," Dawlish insisted, having found out about the trip through his sources. "I appreciate the assistance, John," Dumbledore stalled, surprised to have met the man at the Hogwarts gates as he, Harry, and Remus were leaving the building. It was an overcast morning on the Sunday before Easter, but Kingsley was going to meet us, and I'm sure you're needed here. Hasn't been a black sighting for months, and if anything, maybe I can pick up some more clues looking over his cell. Kings has other things he could be working on. And I don't want to see Potter come to harm," the Auror explained, giving Harry a nod. He figured this was his chance to get in better with the boy who lived, and maybe get some more insight on what was up with his phenomenal skill. The headmaster pursed his lips, considering. Even with his prodigious intellect, put on the spot he couldn't come up with a perfect answer for why it didn't make sense for the Auror to come. He finally just admitted it could be dangerous, even beyond the Dementors. Dawlish gave a slight smirk at catching that there was more going on than Dumbledore wanted known, and said, "Good job, I've been practicing all this dueling lately, then. Party Harry Potter. I wonder if we'll have to invite him to the party if there's a dungeon." Harry was currently the party leader, but he assumed he'd have to make Dumbledore the leader to invite a fourth member. And it would mean they couldn't use party chat to communicate without raising even more questions. "I suppose you have us there," Dumbledore nodded, managing not to glance at Harry and Remus, and acting like this was all perfectly fine. "Shall we go down to Hogsmeade to apparate, then?" The walk off the grounds was quiet, Dawlish just trying to read into the silence, and the other three hurriedly communicating over party chat and replies to Harry. They basically agreed that what they were going to do was probably not going to be secret for long anyway. They were always going to have to notify the Ministry if they found secret rooms on the island. As long as they got first crack at investigating them, it would hopefully all work out. Dumbledore sidelong apparated Harry, who still did not enjoy the sensation of being turned into an infinitely thin stream of matter and sucked through an extra-dimensional straw to his destination. Got his bearings on a forbidding strip of rocky coastline facing into the morning sun as it peeked beneath the clouds that had sprawled across the country overnight. At least it wasn't raining at the moment, but it wasn't at all warm. There didn't appear to be any civilization for miles, other than a small, unassuming hut a short walk away, above carved rock steps down to a small pier with an oversized rowboat moored to it. Remus and Dawlish popped in near them, and Dumbledore called, "Hullo, the house." A pair of darts started moving from within, and an aura-classed man with Ministry Guild tags exited and exchanged pleasantries with the headmaster and Dawlish before leading them down to the pier. "Keep hands and legs inside the boat at all times for your own safety," he admonished, by rote. There were a couple of boards across the interior to serve as benches that they all sat on. The man unmoored the boat, took the seat at the back, waved his wand at the rudder, and they began to set off into the sea, much like riding the spelled rowboats as first years entering Hogwarts. The boat seemed to pick up speed as it went, skimming like a stone across swells in the water at certain points. Dour and silent, their pilot grew even more grim as they traveled. The day had already been overcast and chill, but it seemed to sink into Harry's bones as they sped across the waves. They managed to catch the drizzle that had been heading from west to east across Britain, and the sun rose high enough to vanish behind the vast cloud bank. But even if the day had somehow been clear, something about where they were going probably would have changed the quality of the light. The longer they were on the boat, the more it seemed like color was leaching out of the world, and Harry eventually realized that it was because they were in a long shadow of an unplottable building. They were almost upon it before the tower shimmered into a visibility as if it had always been there, a mirage on the ocean, only revealing itself when right on top of it, much like the door to Sirius townhouse. But its magic seemed unable to fool the sun, and the immense edifice had been holding them in its shadow for some time, due to its massive height. How powerful had Echrisdes been to raise such an imposing tower from a bare scrap of land in the middle of the sea? Had he transported it stone by stone across the water, somehow managed to make conjured materials last centuries, or just transfigured it from a larger rocky island that had once been in place? The tremendous triangular tower loomed. Even in the daylight, far above, Harry could make out the distant flicker of user interface over black robes. as dementors circled the prison, ever watchful. "That whole thing is Azkaban?" he asked. Shouted, really, over the sound of waves breaking against the island, wind streaming past them, and the boat racing across the water. He'd been expecting a small fortress, with maybe a hidden basement. Instead, the prison would have been listed as one of the biggest buildings in Britain if the Muggles knew about it. It had to be a couple 100 yards wide on each of its 3 faces, and was clearly taller than its width. He started to count windows, and figured it could have hundreds of rooms. The wireframe of the building that appeared in his map couldn't even show the whole thing at one time. "How many prisoners are there?" "More than you'd expect," Dawlish explained. "Not many go in for just a short stint, but most of the building is empty. Some of it no one's ever even opened up." As the boat made for its mooring at the base of the tower, it fully eclipsed the sunlight, plunging them into a shadow almost as dark as night. Harry didn't know what he'd been expecting, but he was definitely now wondering what he'd got himself into.